brothers and sisters, we've come to the end of another week. Hope your week is going great and you're looking forward to Sunday being in God's house, worshiping Jesus, fellowshipping with his people. Invite someone to come with you. Here at First Baptist, we have all three services like we do most Sundays. Our contemporary services at 8:30 and 11 o'clock, and our traditional service at 9:45. Life groups all morning, so join us for life groups and then for worship. Today we are in chapter 12, getting close to finishing up 2 Corinthians chapter 12, and Paul is continuing to defend his apostleship to the believers there in Corinth, and he's explaining some of his behavior, both current behavior and past behavior. And as I was reading through all of this, the verse that really jumped out at me and spoke to my heart was verse 10. Chapter 12, verse 10. Where he says, "Therefore I am well content with weakness, with insults, with distresses, with persecutions, with difficulties, for Christ's sake. For when I am weak, then I am strong." You know, and that's one of the more intriguing verses that Paul writes in the New Testament when he says, "I am content with weakness, insults, distresses, persecutions, and difficulties for Christ's sake." I want you to notice all the items that he says I'm well content in. And the NIV, if that's the Bible you read, actually says, rather than I'm well content, he says I delight in. I think the King James and the New King James say I take pleasure in. And so notice what he talks about here. He says, I delight in, take pleasure in. I'm content in weakness, insults. The King James, I think, says reproaches. Then in my New American Standard Translation, distresses. Other translations say hardships or in needs. You have a point of need. With persecutions, with difficulties. Some Bibles say troubles or distresses. So here's all these things that Paul says. These are hard things. These are not easy things. And yet Paul says in all of those, I've learned to be content and take some pleasure. Now, the caveat is that he says, for Christ's sake. That if he suffers because of Jesus, that's when he can take delight in it. If he suffers because of Jesus, that's when he can be content in it. Because he says it's in those moments that I'm strong, that God shows out. Now, Paul, we have to be honest. Excuse me. Paul was not always passive when he was persecuted or faced opposition. You'll remember he... when he was being beaten in Jerusalem, he made it known to the Romans that he was a Roman citizen. When he was on trial, he appealed to Caesar. He defended himself to King Agrippa. Here he's defending his apostleship. So don't get the idea that Paul was always this little wallflower who was always passive. He was not. But what is obvious is that Paul was never concerned just about winning personally, getting ahead personally, financially succeeding personally. He was always focused on the gospel, seeing people saved, sharing the gospel, being evangelistic, and seeing people grow and develop and mature as disciples. And if he had to suffer for that to happen, he was okay with that. He was okay with that. That's what was important. That's when he was content. And maybe the lesson for you and me is we need to be less concerned with personal comfort and personal happiness in our lives as disciples, and more focused on simply being faithful and obedient. And if being faithful and obedient to Jesus means that sometimes we're not comfortable and life is not as happy, we're okay with that. We can be content with that because it's for his sake, for his glory, and for his gospel. Because if your focus is always on comfort and happiness, then there's going to be times you turn your back on Jesus. And there will be times you won't sacrifice and won't be faithful. Something to think about. I'll see you Sunday in worship and then Monday as we wrap up 2 Corinthians. God bless you.